So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to Taj West End, Bengaluru. I'm Naina Khanna, and on behalf of the entire hotel and IHCL, I welcome you to a lovely evening with the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. After a long interval of close to 1.5 years, we gather together here, and we are both elated and excited that the Prabha Khaitan Foundation has selected our hotel to launch Dr. Vikram Sampath's new book. I would like to take this opportunity to mention that we are honored to be associated with the foundation. May I please welcome from the audience Mr. C.T. Ravi, National General Secretary of the BJP, Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai, Chairman of the Arden Capital and Manipal Group Education, Mr. Jonathan Zatka, Honorable Consul General of Israel to South India, Mr. Devanand Prant Sampark Pramukh of the RSS. Mr. Mukherjee, I don't see is here, but I will welcome him. He is the Area Director, Karnataka, and General Manager, Taj West End. Without further ado, may I please call upon Ms. Surekha Prahlad. She is the, sorry, I can't remember the first name, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Hello, everybody. I welcome you all to Kitaab, an initiative of Prabha Khaitan Foundation. Established by Dr. Prabha Khaitan in 1980s, Prabha Khaitan Foundation provides platform to caregivers, committed individuals, and like-minded institutions to implement cultural, educational, literary, and social welfare projects in India. During the dark days of pandemic, Prabha Khaitan Foundation continued with their sessions through virtual platforms to uplift the spirit of its patron. As life is gradually coming back to normalcy, the foundation has begun to host physical sessions in some cities, adhering to all COVID protocols and taking necessary precautions. Well, the birth of a book always calls for a celebration. Kitaab provides a platform to authors to display and showcase their newest literary works before a discerning audience and media through tastefully curated book launches. Today we are gathered here to celebrate the launch of Dr. Vikram Sampath's new book, Savarkar, A Contested Legacy. Bangalore-based historian Dr. Vikram Sampath is the author of acclaimed books like Splendors of Royal Mysore, The Untold Story of the Vadiyars, My Name is Gohar Jan, Life and Times of a Musician, Voice of Veena, S. Balchandar, a biography, and Savarkar, Echoes from the Forgotten Past. He was awarded the Sahitya Academy's first Yuva Puraskar in English Literature in 2012 and ARSC International Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York for his book on Gohar Jan in 2015. Vikram was among 4 writers and artists to be selected as writer-in-residence at Rashtrapati Bhavan. A trained Carnatic vocalist, Vikram has established the Archive of Indian Music, India's first digital sound repository for vintage recordings. Now I would request Mr. C.T. Ravi, National General Secretary of BJP, Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai, Chairman Manipal Global Education, to come on the stage. I would also request Dr. Vikram Sampath and journalist and founder of Pickle Jar, Ms. Vasanti Hari Prakash, to be on the stage. Is Mr. Mukherjee around? Yeah. Now, may I request Mr. Mukherjee, General Manager Taj West End, Bengaluru, to facilitate our esteemed guest, author and Ms. Hari Prakash with Uttruyo. Thank you, Mr. Mukherjee. Now the time has come for which we all have been eagerly waiting. I'd request esteemed guests on this dais to unveil the book. Thank you so much, everybody. I request you to kindly take your seats. Now, may I request Mr. C.T. Ravi to say a few words? Thank you, sir.
Namaskara. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to all. Just yesterday, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of our independence. My greetings to you all on this glorious occasion, my dear friends. After celebrating the National Day, it is my great pleasure to be with you this evening to witness the launch of the book Savarkar, a contested legacy by Dr. Vikram Sampath. I consider it a privilege to talk about Veer Savarkar, a freedom fighter, politician, lawyer, passionate writer, social reformer, and institutor of Hindutva ideology. Only a brilliant historian like Dr. Sampath could have written this factual truth about one of India's great nationalists, Veer Savarkar. A multifaceted genius, Dr. Sampath has ignited the minds of Indians through his series on Veer Savarkar, whose life has been wrongly portrayed by biased historians. An engineer, mathematician from Bitsfilani, an MBA in France from SP Jain, Mumbai, and a PhD in history and music from the University of Queensland, a trained Carnatic vocalist, founder, director of the Bengaluru Literature Festival. Dr. Sampath is also an authority on Indian culture and heritage. I am sure he wears many more hats than I have listed just now. Right, Dr. Sampath. It was my pleasure to work with Dr. Sampath in the Karnataka Tourism Vision Group when I was the tourism minister in 2020. Veer Savarkar, as you all know, friends, is a very inspiring personality who carved a reputable niche for himself as an activist and freedom fighter who fiercely advocated for India's independence. As an activist, Veer Savarkar came up with Hindutva, which is now the main from nationalism in India. In today's world, one could not have asked for a better leader than Veer Savarkar as a role model to every individual. I would like to emphasize about the leadership qualities of Veer Savarkar, a great leader from whom I have gained tremendous inspiration. A visionary leader, Veer Savarkar was the first person who looked far into the future by joining the Hindu Mahasabha and popularized the term Hindutva, even though many people termed it as controversial. Today, Hindutva is accepted as a way of life thanks to the vision of Veer Savarkar. Savarkar was associated with the India House and founded student societies including Abhinav Bharat Society, Free India Society, and launched publication that spoke of achieving complete Indian independence through revolution. Savarkar published the Indian War of Independence about the Indian rebellion of 1857 that was later banned by British authorities. A well-informed and knowledgeable leader, Veer Savarkar completed his degrees from Fergusson College, Pune, and studied law in the UK. Even during his college days in London, Veer Savarkar organized the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the India's first war of independence, 1857. During this event, students were badges with the legend honor of the martyrs of 1857. This was the real education which Savarkar experienced and helped other students understand the struggles of India under the British occupation. Courage is one leadership factor that separates the leaders from great leaders. The brave Veer Savarkar confronted the greatest power on earth during his time, the British Empire. He openly called for the total independence of India from the British and even advocated for revolution to achieve this goal. Even though he was arrested and sentenced to 50 years in the cellular jail on charges of floating an armed revolt against the Morley Minto reforms, Veer Savarkar tried to escape from the British by diving in the water. Despite the brutal torture he endured in the cellular jail under the hands of British, Veer Savarkar never lost his sight from his goal for India and Hindutva. Friends, I have visited the cellular jail, or Kalapani as it is called in Andaman, where Veer Savarkar was housed. Every time I was imagining the flight he had undergo of fighting against the British Empire during India's freedom struggle. After being released from the cellular jail, he continued working towards the abolishment of untouchability in Ratnagiri and Maharashtra. In 1930, he also practiced dining of all Hindus together, irrelevant of their caste. Such was the contribution of Veer Savarkar to India that former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had described Savarkar as the remarkable son of India. In 1970, the Congress government also issued the postal stamp in Veer Savarkar's honor. Friends, I will continue my mother tongue. ಬಂಧುಗಳೇ, ನಮ್ಮ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಕೆಲವರಿಗೆ ಅನ್ಯಾಯ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವರ ನಿಜವಾದ ಹೋರಾಟವನ್ನು, ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಕೊಡುಗೆಯನ್ನು ಗುರುತಿಸುವಂಥ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆ ರೀತಿ ಇತಿಹಾಸದ ಅವಗಣನೆಗೆ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲೇ ತುತ್ತಾದವರು ಹಲವು ಮಂದಿ. ನಾವೀಗ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಹೇಗೆ ಬಂತು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಮಹಾತ್ಮ ಗಾಂಧಿಯವರ ಅಹಿಂಸಾತ್ಮಕ ಚಳುವಳಿಯಿಂದ ಬಂತು ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ಅರ್ಧ ಸತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತೇವೆ. ಅದು ಅರ್ಧ ಸತ್ಯ. ಅರ್ಧ ಸತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಪೂರ್ಣ ಸತ್ಯ ಅಂತ ಒಪ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಕ್ರಾಂತಿಕಾರಿಗಳು ಒಂದೇ ಮಾತರಂ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಕೊರಳನ್ನ ನೇಣಿನ ಕೊಣಕಿಗೆ ಒಡ್ಡಿ ಪ್ರಾಣಾರ್ಪಣೆ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡ್ರು. ಹಾಗಾದರೆ ಅವ್ರ ಜೀವದಾನಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಯಾವ ಬೆಲೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೇವೆ? ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಕ್ರಾಂತಿಕಾರಿಗಳನ್ನು, ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಹೋರಾಟಗಾರರು ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಬಲಿದಾನದಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಬಂತು ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಭಾರತದ ಇತಿಹಾಸದಲ್ಲಿ ಗುರುತಿಸುವ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಒಂದು ಕ್ಷಣ ನಾವು ಯೋಚಿಸಬೇಕಾದಂಥ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇದೆ. ಒಬ್ಬ ಮನುಷ್ಯನಿಗೆ 2 ಜೀವಾವಧಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷೆ. ಕೆಲವರಿಗೆ ಪುಣ್ಯ ಇತ್ತು, ಟೇಬಲ್ಲು, ಕುರ್ಚಿ, ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಆತ್ಮಕಥೆಯನ್ನು ಬರೀಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬೇಕಾದಂಥ ಪುಸ್ತಕ, ಪೆನ್ನಿನ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ. ಆದರೆ ಆ ರೀತಿ ಯಾವ ಪುಣ್ಯವೂ ವೀರ್ ಸಾವರ್ಕರ್ಗೆ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ಪೆನ್ ಕೊಡಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಪೇಪರ್ ಕೊಡಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೆ ತನ್ನ ಬೇಡಿಯನ್ನೇ ಪೆನ್ನನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು, ಗೋಡೆಯನ್ನೇ ಪುಸ್ತಕವನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಜೈಲಿನ ಗೋಡೆಯ ಮೇಲೆ ತಾನು ಬರಿತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತಾನೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಬರೆದಂಥ ವೀರ್ ಸಾವರ್ಕರನ್ನು ಅವ್ರ ಕೊಡುಗೆ ಏನು ಅಂತ ಕೆಲವರು ಪ್ರಶ್ನಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ವೀರ್ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಶಬ್ದ ಯಾಕೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟರು ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ಅವಹೇಳನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೇನು ಗೊತ್ತು ಕಾಲಾಪಾನಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ? ಕಾಲಾಪಾನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿಕ್ಕೂ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲದಂಥ ಸ್ಥಿತಿ. ಅದರ ಕರಾಳ ಚರಿತ್ರೆಯನ್ನು ನಾವು ಊಹಿಸ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೂ ಕೂಡ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗೆ ಕ್ರಾಂತಿಕಾರಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಸಿಗಬೇಕಾದ ನ್ಯಾಯ ಸಿಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಭಗತ್ ಸಿಂಗ್, ಚಂದ್ರಶೇಖರ್ ಆಜಾದ್, ಅಸ್ಫಾಕುಲ್ಲಾ ಖಾನ್, ರಾಜ್ಗುರು ಇವರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಸಿಗಬೇಕಾದ ನ್ಯಾಯ ಸಿಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗೆ ನ್ಯಾಯ ಸಿಗದೇ ಇರೋರ ಸಾಲಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅಗ್ರಗಣ್ಯರಾಗಿ ಸಿಗುವವರು ವೀರ್ ಸಾವರ್ಕರು. ಅವರ ದೂರದೃಷ್ಟಿಯ ಪರಿಣಾಮ ಅವತ್ತು ಅವರು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ಮುಂದಾಗುವ ಅಪಾಯವನ್ನು ಊಹಿಸಿದರು. ಅವರವತ್ತು ಸೈನ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇರಿ ಅಂತ ಕರೆ ಕೊಡದೇ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾಶ್ಮೀರನೂ ಇರ್ತಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಪಂಜಾಬ್ ಇರ್ತಿತ್ತೋ ಇಲ್ಲೋ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಬ್ರಿಟಿಷರು ಭಾರತಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಕೊಡಲಿಲ್ಲ, 540 ಸಂಸ್ಥಾನಗಳಿಗೆ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಹೋದರು. ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ನೀವು ಭಾರತಕ್ಕಾದರೂ ಸೇರ್ಬೋದು, ಪಾಕಿಸ್ತಾನಕ್ಕಾದರೂ ಸೇರ್ಬೋದು, ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರವಾಗಿ ಆದರೂ ಇರ್ಬೋದು ಅಂಥೇಳಿ. ಆದರೆ ಸರ್ದಾರ್ ವಲ್ಲಭಾಯ್ ಪಟೇಲು 540 ಸಂಸ್ಥಾನಗಳನ್ನು ಒಗ್ಗೂಡಿಸ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಬರೀ ಮಾತುಕತೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಸಾಕಾಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದರ ಹಿಂದುಗಡೆ ಭಾರತದ ಸೈನ್ಯದ ಬಲ ಇತ್ತು. ಆ ಸೈನ್ಯದ ಬಲಕ್ಕೆ ದೂರದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಿಂದ ಹಿಂದೂಗಳನ್ನು ಸೈನ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇರಿ ಅಂತ ಕರೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದು ವೀರ್ ಸಾವರ್ಕರ್. ಅಕಸ್ಮಾತ್ ಸೈನ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇರದೇ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ಪಠಾಣ್ ಸೈನ್ಯ ಭಾರತದ ಇನ್ನೆಷ್ಟು ಭಾಗವನ್ನು ಅತಿಕ್ರಮಿಸಿಕೊಡ್ತಿತ್ತೋ ನಾವು ಊಹೆ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೂ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗ್ತಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಅಂಥ ವೀರ್ ಸಾವರ್ಕರ್ ದೂರದೃಷ್ಟಿಯನ್ನು ಅನುಮಾನದಿಂದ ನೋಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಪಮಾನಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ಇದು ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಭಾರತದ ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಒಂದು ಅಪಮಾನದ ಸಂಗತಿ. ಹೀಗೆ ನ್ಯಾಯ ಸಿಗಬೇಕಾದಂಥ ಸಾಲಿನಲ್ಲಿ 3 ದಶಕಗಳ ಕಾಲ, ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಬಂದ 3 ದಶಕಗಳ ಕಾಲ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರಿಗೂ ನ್ಯಾಯ ಸಿಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ನಾವು ಒಂದು ಸಂಗತಿಯ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಆಲೋಚಿಸಬೇಕಂತ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇದೆ. ನನಗೆ ಈಗಲೂ ಅದು ಕಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ಯಾವಾಗ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಬಂತು ಅಂದರೆ ಆಗಸ್ಟ್ 15, 1947 ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೇವೆ. ಅದರ ಹಿಂದಿನ ದಿನ ನಡೆದ ಭಾರತ ವಿಭಜನೆಯ ದುರಂತ ಕಥೆಯನ್ನು ಮರೆತು ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಭಾರತ ವಿಭಜನೆ ಆಯಿತು? ಈ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಗಂಭೀರವಾಗಿ ಚಿಂತಿಸಬೇಕಾದಂಥ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇದೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಚಿಂತಿಸಿದಾಗ, ಆ ಸತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡಾಗ ಆಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ಸಾವರ್ಕರ್ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಆ ಸತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳದೇ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಸಾವರ್ಕರ್ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇನ್ನೆರಡು ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನು ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ನಿಮಗೂ ಮನಸ್ಸಿನೊಳಗೆ ಹಾಕ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕಾದ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ, ಯಾವಾಗ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಬಂತು ಅಂದರೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೇವೆ, ಯಾವಾಗ ಹೋಯಿತು ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆಯಾ? ಯಾಕೆ ಹೋಯಿತು ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆಯಾ? ಯಾಕೆ ಹೋಯಿತು, ಯಾವಾಗ ಹೋಯಿತು ಅನ್ನೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಉತ್ತರ ಕಂಡುಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಆಗ ಯಾಕೆ ಹೋಯಿತು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ಭವಿಷ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗಿರಬೇಕು, ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರವನ್ನು ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಆಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ದುರ್ದೈವದ ಸಂಗತಿ ಏನು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆಯಿಂದ ಟಿ ವಿ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಅಫ್ಘಾನಿಸ್ತಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ತಾಲಿಬಾನ್ನ ಅಟ್ಟಹಾಸವನ್ನು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಬುದ್ಧನ ನೆಲ ಅದು, ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಗೆ ಕೊಡುಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟ ನೆಲ ಅದು. ಮಹಾಭಾರತ ರಾಮಾಯಣದ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸಂಬಂಧವನ್ನು, ಕರುಳುಬಳ್ಳಿಯ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡ ನೆಲ ಅದು. ಇವತ್ತು ಕರುಳುಬಳ್ಳಿಯ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇಲ್ಲ. ರಾಮಾಯಣದ ಯಾವ ಕುರುಹುಗಳು ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಅಫ್ಘಾನಿಸ್ತಾನದಲ್ಲಿ, ಅವತ್ತಿನ ಗಾಂಧಾರ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಅಫ್ಘಾನಿಸ್ತಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ಹುಡುಕೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಶಿವ ತಾಂಡವ ನೃತ್ಯ ನಾಡಿದ ಸ್ಥಳ ಇವತ್ತು ಶಿವನ ಗುರುತು ಸಿಗೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಹನುಮನ ಪೂಜೆ ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ದ ಜಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಹನುಮನ ಹೆಸರು ಕೂಡ ಇವತ್ತು ಉಳಿದಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆ ಹೀಗಾಯಿತು ಅಂತ ನಾವೇನಾದ್ರು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದೇವಾ? ಈ ಸತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಯಾರಾದರೂ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅವನು ಕೋಮುವಾದಿ ಆಗ್ತಾನೆ. ಇದು ಸತ್ಯ ಮಾತ್ರ, ಕೋಮುವಾದ ಅಲ್ಲ. ನಗನಗ್ತ ನಿಂತಿದ್ದ ಬುದ್ಧ ಯಾರಿಗೂ ಅನ್ಯಾಯ ಮಾಡಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಬಾಮಿಯಾನ್ ಬೆಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಬುದ್ಧ ಶಾಂತಿಯ ಸಂದೇಶವನ್ನೇ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿದ್ದು, ಅಹಿಂಸೆಯ ಮಾತನ್ನೇ ಆಡಿದ್ದು. ಆದರೆ ನಗನಗ್ತ ನಿಂತಿದ್ದ ಬುದ್ಧನನ್ನು ಸಹಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗದಂಥ ಶಾಂತಿದೂತರು ನಮಗೆ ಓಟಿನ ಆಸೆಗೆ ಬ್ರದರ್ಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಅವರು ಶಾಂತಿದೂತರು. ನಗನಗ್ತ ಬುದ್ಧನನ್ನು ಸಹಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳಿಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆ ನಗನಗ್ತ ಬುದ್ಧನನ್ನು ಅವರು ಅಳಿಸಿ ಹಾಕಿದರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುವ ಸತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕಾದ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇದೆ. ಹಾಗಾದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಾವು ಯಾಕೆ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರವನ್ನು ಕಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಮಾತ್ರ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗತ್ತೆ. ಆ ಸತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಿರಂತರ ಜಾಗರೂಕತೆ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂಘಟಿತರಾಗಬೇಕಾಗಿರುವಂಥ ಸತ್ಯ ನಮಗೆ ಮನವರಿಕೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಆ ಮನವರಿಕೆ ಆಗದೇ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಗಳಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರವನ್ನು ಯಾವತ್ತು ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ಕಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೋದು, ಯಾವ ಗಳಿಗೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ನಾವು ಕಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೋದು. ಆ ಗಳಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿರುವ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಕಳೆದು ಹೋಗಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತಿದ್ದರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ತೆರಬೇಕಾದ ಬೆಲೆ ಒಂದೇ, ನಿರಂತರ ಜಾಗರೂಕತೆ, ಸಂಘಟಿತರಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಭಾರತೀಯರಾಗಿ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡೋದು. ಈಗ ಟಾಲರೆನ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಚರ್ಚೆ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ನೆಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಟಾಲರೆನ್ಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋದು ಸಮಭಾವ. ಟಾಲರೆನ್ಸ್ ಮಾತಾಡೋರು ಎಷ್ಟು ದಿನ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಸಹಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾರೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಟಾಲರೆನ್ಸ್ ಮಾತಾಡೋರು ಕಾಶ್ಮೀರಿ ಪಂಡಿತರನ್ನು ಸಹಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಉಳಿದ ಪ್ರದೇಶಗಳಿಗೆ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಗ್ಯಾರಂಟಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇವತ್ತು ಆಫ್ಘಾನಿಸ್ತಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ಟಾಲರೆನ್ಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಮಾನವ ಹಕ್ಕು ಇಲ್ಲ, ವಿಶ್ವಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಎಲ್ಲೋಗಿದೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಜೀವ ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಆ ಫ್ಲೈಟ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಹತ್ತಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಬೀಳ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಮನುಕುಲಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಅಪಮಾನ ಸಂಗತಿ. ಆ ಮನುಕುಲಕ್ಕೆ ಅಪಮಾನವಾಗುವಂಥ ಪ್ರಚೋದನೆ ಯಾವುದರಿಂದ ಬಂತು ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿಲ್ಲ. ಸಭ್ಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯ ನಾಶ ಯಾಕಾಯಿತು ಜಗತ್ತಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯ ಉಳಿವಿಗೆ ನಾವೇನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ವೀರ್ ಸಾವರ್ಕರ್ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಆಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸಂಪತ್ ಅವರು ಬರೆದಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ನಿಜ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆ ನಿಜ ಇತಿಹಾಸವನ್ನು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ನಿರಂತರ ಜಾಗರೂಕತೆಯ ಮೂಲಕ ನಮಗೆ ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟು ಗಳಿಸಿಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರವನ್ನು ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಮಾತನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿ, ಇದೊಂದು ಅವಿಸ್ಮರಣೀಯ ಗಳಿಗೆ. ಸಂಪತ್ತವರು ಬರೆದಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ನೈಜ ಘಟನೆಯನ್ನು ಆಧರಿಸಿದಂಥ ಇತಿಹಾಸ, ಯಾರು ಪೂರ್ವಾಗ್ರಹ ಪೀಡಿತರಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಯಾರು ವಾಸ್ತವಿಕ ನೆಲೆಯಿಂದ ದೂರ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅವರ ಮನಪರಿವರ್ತನೆಗೆ ಒಂದು ದಾರಿಯಾಗತ್ತೆ. ವೀರ್ ಸಾವರ್ಕರ್ ಅವರ ತ್ಯಾಗ ಬಲಿದಾನ, ಕುಟುಂಬದ ತ್ಯಾಗ ಬಲಿದಾನ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ಭಾರತದ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರದ ಬಿಡುಗಡೆಗೆ ಸಹಸ್ರಾರು ಜನ, ಲಕ್ಷಾಂತರ ಜನ ತಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಾಣ, ತಮ್ಮ ಇಡೀ ಸಂಪತ್ತು, ತಮ್ಮ ಜೀವಮಾನವನ್ನು ತ್ಯಾಗ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಸತ್ಯ ಸಂಗತಿಯ ಅರಿವಿಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಮಾತನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿ, ಆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಯೋಧರಿಗೆ, ಕ್ರಾಂತಿಕಾರಿಗಳಿಗೆ, ಎಲ್ಲ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾರತದ ಬಿಡುಗಡೆಗೆ ಸರ್ವ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡಿದಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲ ತ್ಯಾಗಜೀವಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಅನಂತ ನಮನಗಳನ್ನು ಸಲ್ಲಿಸಿ ನಾನು ಮಾತು ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಜೈ ಹಿಂದ್.
Thank you, sir. May I request Mr. Mohandas Bhai to say a few words?
Folks, I'm happy to be here for many reasons. The most important is our Constitution promised us freedom of speech. Freedom of speech means we have the freedom to know our history based on facts, not on doctored facts, not the leftist version, not the Marxist version. And to me, that is the most sacred thing in the Constitution, because we are all free thinkers, we are free citizens of a free country, and we are entitled to know the truth about our freedom movement, about everything else. I did not know about Savarkar. Like all of you, I read my history. I heard there was somebody called Savarkar, there's somebody called Gandhi. We learned a lot of Gandhi. We saw the movie. We read Ram Guha's book, and Gandhi gave us freedom. Yes, Gandhi fought for freedom. Nehru gave us freedom. Yes, he was one of the freedom fighters. And of course, we didn't hear about the naval mutiny. We didn't hear about Clement Attlee's statement, why the British left India. We didn't hear about that, but we were told that there were 2 or 3 important people who gave us freedom, and we all listened. I went to Port Blair for a holiday. My friend took me to the Selva jail, and I was shocked. Here was a patriot and a nationalist who spent 12 years in solitary confinement, brutally tortured, pulling that cart like an animal. And we didn't hear about him. Gandhiji did not spend 12 years in solitary confinement. I respect Gandhiji. Nehru never spent anything. He lived a life of luxury. Yet they are the freedom fighters who gave us freedom, and not all these people. And I was shocked. Then I started reading. Then luckily for us, Vikram Sampath, a very honest Bengalurian, all Bengalurians are good. He's not part of Lutyens Delhi. So we are very lucky, because we are far away from Lutyens Delhi, who try to control your mind and tell you that the Hindu community is very communal. Hindu communities are terrorists. They terrorize people. Now if they see Afghanistan, they know who are the real terrorists. Because Hinduism as a faith recognizes everybody, except that many Hindus feel all religions are the same, and they're not the same. I just want to end by quoting something from his book to say why this book is important for us in this context. Indira Gandhi on page 555, Vikram has said, Indira Gandhi said his death removes a great figure of contemporary India and his name was a byword for daring and patriotism. He was cast in the mold of a classical revolutionary. Countless people drew inspiration from him. Indira Gandhi, founder of the Indian National Congress that is there today. Then S.A. Dange, Communist Party of India chairman, said, the death of Veer Savarkar removes from the scene of Indian history one the great anti-imperialist revolutionary. The communists paid tribute. And then Indira Gandhi in page 569 said, when she was told about his centenary, Veer Savarkar's daring defiance of the British government has its own importance in the annals of a freedom movement. I wish success to the plans. She made a private donation of 11,000 rupees to a memorial fund, and in 1970 released a postage stamp, and also on her instruction, the film division produced a documentary. Then turn to the last page. See the bigotry of people in Lutyens, Delhi. Jairam Ramesh from Bangalore. We know him well, a Darbari, a family retainer, and one who is always throwing opprobriums because, he has no political standing, a family retainer and Darbari. I called him that openly, Vikram. He says, my endorsement of Sampath's fine book is as a student of Indian political history, not as someone who believes that Savarkar is a profoundly divisive figure and the very opposite of what Mahatma Gandhi lived for and ultimately was killed for as well. A fake comparison which Vikram has demolished. And also Vikram has told us in this book that Savarkar was responsible for drafting a constitution which said, a draft constitution, which you must ask him, which said that all Indians will be equal under the constitution and everybody will have equal rights. He didn't separate Hindus and Muslims. He was not divisive. He said everybody is equal, everybody is citizens of this country, and this is what the constitution should be. And that's what he said. And all that has been forgotten, fake narratives. Vikram, hats off for you for educating us, telling us the truth. May you write many more books so that we, as citizens of this country, read these books and decide for ourselves and not have a mind contaminated by people who want to control the mind, who are our freedom fighters and whom should we respect in this country. Thank you, Vikram. God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Pai. Moving on. Today, we have Ms. Vasanthi Hariprakash, who will be in conversation with Dr. Sampath. Ms. Hariprakash is an award-winning radio anchor, TV journalist. Her past 2 decades have been spent in leading media houses. She is the founder of media entity Pickle Jar. She is the host of the Dosa King podcast on Spotify. As a presenter, she was awarded the India Radio Excellence Award by the India Radio Forum. In 2019, Ms. Hariprakash was invited by the US Consulate in Chennai to mentor young adults to help them achieve their goals. In December 2020, she was awarded the UNFPA-backed Ladli Award for Gender Sensitivity in Journalism for her reports while traveling by road and rail across 13 districts of Karnataka. Now I would request the audience to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Okay. Without really taking much of the audience time, until the mic issues are resolved, ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದು ಸೇರಿರುವಂಥ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರಿಗೂ, as well as those who are following this program live, which is being beamed out, a program which which is a sequel, which is a book which already has had its launch in the first edition, and I had the honor of moderating a conversation with Vikram. And this is a repeat act. And yet I think you've made me do the same board exam type of studying of 572 pages, out of which almost 125 plus are notes and, you know, references, indexes, just going on to show the amount of, you know, research which is also a lot of original writing, which is what I want to share with the audience here and outside. That for someone like me who is equidistant from any political ideology, I'm at arm's length, and I think that's what it's taken me to survive almost 2 decades in this field. But when Vikram approached me to moderate this conversation, I had a look at the book, went through it, and I can tell you this much, that even those who have never either heard about Savarkar or think, like Mohan said a few minutes earlier, have your own notion about Savarkar, this book is certainly compelling reading. It is because it's something that he has written with an objective mind, very truly, and also the fact that the references are something which are either by Savarkar himself from what he has written, or original accounts of the contemporaries at that time, including the British officers. So from that point and vantage point in history, let's start our dialogue today. Vikram, I know that we are, you know, this time constraint is for real. We have a night curfew as well. So let us time ourselves. What is it in your clock? 7:35 now. So till what time do you think we can? 8:15. Okay, so I'm going to actually ask Vikram to start with a recap of the first book, which is The Echoes of a Forgotten Past. But before we do that, just so that anybody who has not even gotten to read book number 1, I'm just going to start with a reading from the very first chapter of this particular one, which is being launched, which was launched today, which is A Contested Legacy. And because the time at which the book number 2 starts is also quite dramatic. And this is his release from the cellular jail, from Kalapani, reading even which can give you the jitters and goose flesh. You truly feel for those people who got us the freedom that we tend to take for granted. So I'm going to start with this, and on the morning of 6th January 1924, Savarkar was summoned to the office of the superintendent of Pune's Yerawada jail, where he had been lodged for a year now. When told that he was to be released, Savarkar could barely trust what he heard. He had received several such false alarms of his imminent release in Port Blair as well. Was this yet another cruel joke that destiny was playing on him? He wondered. It was only when he saw the letter of Alexander Montgomery, secretary to the Home Department in Bombay, authorizing his release, that reality finally hit him, unquote. So here is a man who is out of jail, and he doesn't even have his own clothes. Someone who works in the jail actually gives him the clothes that Savarkar will eventually walk out as a free man, but not so free. So I'm going to let Vikram tell us a bit of a flashback. It's almost like, you know, like in a Hindi serial, Kahani Ab Tak.
Thank you, Vasanti. A very good evening to everyone. First of all, sincere thanks to Mr. C.T. Ravi and my dear friend and well-wisher, Mr. Mohandas Pai, for gracing this occasion and for all the kind words you said, and to everyone here who's actually braved the COVID situation, the protocols and all of that. All of you are very dear to me, my dear friends. I'm very deeply indebted to each one of you to be here on this very significant occasion for me. It's a very emotional moment for me today. It's a culmination of a 5-year journey. 5 years of my life, my time, my emotions were consumed by this person. And it's a biographer's conundrum as well, that, you know, while you get so involved with your character, when you're actually putting it to print, you're supposed to be very objective. You're supposed to disconnect those emotional cords. Otherwise, there's a very thin line between a biography and a hagiography. And to the best of my ability, I think, I've tried to ensure that an objective view of Savarkar comes through in this volume. Now, as you mentioned, and I think as Mr. Ravi also gave a brief overview of Savarkar's early life, somebody who started India's first organized secret society, the Mitra Mela, which later became the Abhinav Bharat, someone who organized the first ever student bonfire of foreign clothes in Pune in 1905, for which he was even rusticated from college while he was protesting against the partition of Bengal. And then he goes away to London, these 5 stormy years that he's there in London under the tutelage of Shyamji Krishna Varma, that great colossus for the Indian revolutionaries. And in those 5 years, there is a galaxy of characters, very amazing characters, again, whose names possibly don't come in our history books, other than Shyamji Krishna Varma, Virendranath Chattopadhyay, Madam Bhikaji Kama, Madan Lal Dhingra, VVS Iyer, MPT Acharya from our state of Karnataka. There was also Lala Hardayal, who formed the Gadhar party, Bhai Parmanand, so many of them, Sikandar Hayat Khan and so on. And they led the movement for a complete freedom for India in those decades, where even the so-called extremist and the moderate factions within the Congress were only asking for concessions and not for complete freedom. And for this crime, he's actually sentenced, given one of the harshest punishments of 2 life imprisonments, working out to 50 long years in the cellular jail, the dungeons of which he suffered some of the most barbaric tortures. And that is also where he wrote the treatise of Hindutva, almost as I postulate as a causal effect to the Khilafat movement that Gandhiji had launched in India, a very, very dangerous manner in which religion was entering politics for the very first time, and I feel also sowed the seeds of partition of the country. And that's when, a year later, he comes out of jail, and a lot of restrictions are put. A lot of talk is also there about those famous petitions that he wrote, about which I've clarified, I think, ad nauseum, and I won't want to do that again here. But then after coming out, there is a lot of restrictions that are put. 2 main ones is he would actually stay away from politics for 5 years, and also be restricted to the district of Ratnagiri in Maharashtra, and even to go anywhere else outside that, he had to take the permission of the British. And that's where this book kicks off.
Now I have my own mic.
Oh, okay.
And I have my glasses back. So let me now take the story forward. So Savarkar is in Ratnagiri. And to set the political context, as we see in the early pages, Hegdewar seemed like the right man to take up this task. No prizes for guessing. This chapter is the reference to the birth of RSS. He started the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, on 27 September 1925 on the auspicious day of Vijayadashami. All these men opined that Hindu-Muslim unity was a mirage and Hindutva is the only nationalist creed. And while saying so, I've been silenced. Okay, so I'm going to come to this question a little later, Vikram, because given the kind of time that we have, I've really, yes, broadly divided into chunks. But let's really straight go across to what he did, what Savarkar actually did in Ratnagiri. I mean, the British are keeping such a hawk's eye on the man. If he dares do anything which is going to go against that, the dangers of him being thrown back into jail, and what kind of jail sentence that was. And yet nothing deters this man. He starts his work on social reforms. There is a page where you actually say that Savarkar met groups of people in private and articulated his ideas on the 7 shackles of Hindu society, which I found really interesting, that he actually comes and summarizes what were the ills of Hinduism, most of which also are relevant today for anybody who's doing some soul searching. And he says, Vedokta Bandi, denial of access to Vedic literature to non-Brahmins. Vyavasaya Bandi, which is choice of profession by merit and not heredity. Sparsha Bandi, untouchability. Samudra Bandi, barring crossing the seas. Shuddhi Bandi, denial of reconversions to Hinduism. Roti Bandi and Beti Bandi. So he says that this ails Hinduism, and this is what we should be reforming. He goes on to make it his personal cause. He makes sure that not only do the, what gets called as untouchables in the society back then are mainstream. He visits those villages, makes sure that there is also intercaste dining, all this is children, and try the initiative, which is also praised by the British officer as making a genuine difference, that children of all castes are able to sit in only in one section. So in short, these first chapters called Cast in Stone speaks about some stellar reform work that Savarkar does, which is comparable in my mind to what Shri B.R. Ambedkar did. And yet, why don't we see him mentioned, forget about the context of him being blacklisted from our textbooks. Even I didn't get to read in my CBSE textbooks anything about Savarkar. But this is such a genuine piece of reform where he actually, and you could see by all the references and newspaper coverage of that time, why is his contribution to this social reform, to eradication of untouchability, where you could see the man's heart was there, not counted in India's history today?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question that, we normally, in today's political parlance, Hindutva would be equated with Manuvad and upper caste hegemony and all of that we keep hearing. But here we have the father of Hindutva actually bringing out social reforms, as you rightly mentioned, probably much before even Dr. Ambedkar went on full steam. And this was a pilot project that was initiated in Ratnagiri, where he ensured a complete casteless society. And in that chapter, I actually also bring to light the differences in the approach of Gandhi, as also Ambedkar and Savarkar when it came to caste eradication. And I always have maintained that both Savarkar as well as Ambedkar were nihilist in their approach. They looked for a complete unshackling of the caste system, dismantling of the system, and they considered, it was their belief, that the Varna system was what was at the root of all the caste evils we have, whereas at the same time, Gandhi was actually saying that I believe in the Varna system, and I don't consider it to be odious. You shake up the Varna system, and then Hinduism would, come collapsing and so on. And when a group of so-called untouchables go and talk to him once, he says everybody cannot become a viceroy or a prime minister. You have to be born in a particular family to have those leadership genes to become, a leader of the country. Again, something that probably in India today it's been turned on its head, where, to be in a dynasty, you don't have to aspire to the top post of anything in the country. And that's where this whole meritocracy, the Vyavasaya Bandi that you spoke of, where it was your merit that mattered and not which caste or which family you were born in, was something that was propounded by Savarkar. And it was not just theory, as you rightly mentioned, path-breaking reforms of intercaste dining. The first intercaste dining cafe in India started in Ratnagiri by him, where even now, people of different castes, probably there's a lot of hesitation to sit together and eat. And those days where even the Chitpavans and the Deshasthas, the two Brahmin communities, hated to sit with each other and eat, here was a cafe where people of all communities could sit and eat. The first ever temple called the Patit Pavan Mandir, which was open to people of all castes and communities who could enter, an Asprishya Ganapati or an untouchable Ganapati that he had started, where the priest was actually from the so-called lower caste, and even the Brahmin had to go and take his blessings to, for the event. So, and also, as you said, schools where people of all castes and communities, children could sit together and study. So this was actually hitting at the very root of casteism, and this took him 13 years of hard work, a lot of backlash from the orthodoxy. Wherever he went, there were lethal attempts made even on his life. People, literally tried to get him killed, and that continued all through his life. But despite that, as you mentioned today he's not acknowledged for that, and that's also part of the calumny that is heaped on him and the persona non grata that he has become in Indian public discourse, where as someone who was probably the propagator of Hindutva, and also his implication in Gandhi's assassination, of which he was actually honorably exonerated, all of that have ensured that a lot of positive contributions of the man, including on social reforms, have been kept completely away from our public discourse and public knowledge as well.
So one of the writings that you quote, Gandhi from his Gujarati journal Navjeevan of 1921-22, Ambedkar writes about the quintessence of Gandhi's beliefs. Says Mr. Gandhi, Ambedkar says, I believe that if Hindu society had been able to stand, it is because it is founded on the caste system. And of course, after some of the lines, he says that just as we perform in India, children of brothers do not intermarry. Do they cease to love because they do not intermarry? Among the Vaishnavas, many women are so orthodox that they will not eat with the members of the family, nor will they drink water from a common pot. Have they no love? The caste system cannot be said to be bad because it does not allow interdining or intermarriage between different castes. This is Gandhi speaking, for which Ambedkar writes his disagreement. He also sort of speaks about in the pages to come.
Yeah, also I think Ambedkar's main problem with Gandhi was, Gandhi said, the Varna was also something that had become, degenerated into the profession. So Gandhi had no problem with a person of any Varna going and acquiring skills of the other Varna, but to earn his livelihood, he had to stick to his original Varna. So Ambedkar kept saying that, I can go to London, I can become a barrister, but my Varna says I'm supposed to be a scavenger. That means after doing my studies, I have to come back and earn my livelihood through scavenging, which is what Mr. Gandhi wants me to do. And that was where the two fundamentally differed on matters of caste, and which is where I think the consonance between him and Ambedkar and Savarkar shines through a lot more when we read through their original works.
I think, Vikram, what also, through a book like this, it just sets the mood for those of us who are, it's almost like watching a period film or a biopic in this case, that you look back and there are these stalwart leaders, each of them with, of course, unparalleled contribution to the country's freedom struggle, but each with such a different approach. And you have Gandhi and Ambedkar disagreeing, you have Savarkar, and then you have Ambedkar praising Savarkar. Yeah. And, then the book moves on to another very important aspect, which is the role of the revolutionaries. It goes into lengths of particularly Bhagat Singh. It says the story of this huge-made man with whom there is this secret meeting of Savarkar's brother. There is this whole undercurrent, and of course the first book carries lots of details, and they're scintillating details, one of them being Lady Bhikaji Kama, who unfurls probably the first flag, right? So this whole subtext that we have missed, of course each of us knows and we are proud of Bhagat Singh and everybody, but enough is not said is what you get a sense when you read all that was happening. You just get this feeling that, okay, there were all these great leaders who did things in isolation, right? So, but then you don't see a whole layer or fabric which is woven together to then give even the so-called revolutionary or let's say opposite of non-violent means of getting India's freedom a legitimacy. Like the song goes, like we often discuss, De di hame azadi bina khadg bina dhal, sabarmati ke sant tune kar diya kamal. So we do read some of these selective pieces of history, but I think what does come across is the role of revolutionaries. And Bhagat Singh, who has Savarkar's words written, even when he is in jail, so there are many, many things of mutual praise.
Right. Yeah, I think that's another aspect that's been kept away from us, where we've been fed this very, very simplistic, a linear, a monochromatic narrative of what you just mentioned, the song that is dinned into our heads about how we won freedom. But the unbroken chain of Sashastra Kranti, or armed struggle, right from 1857 till 1946, the naval mutiny, which is what eventually got India her freedom. And in this unbroken chain, numerous heroes and heroines, a few whom you named, a few whom I mentioned in the beginning, and along which Savarkar also plays a very important role as being the intellectual, someone who provided that intellectual corpus to revolution. And even after coming out of Ratnagiri, of the jail and into Ratnagiri in house captivity, the underground links with the revolutionaries continued unabated. And that was one reason why the British actually never trusted him. So contrary to popular belief that he sold out and he had signed these petitions, he was receiving a pension and all kinds of things that are said, if he was actually, someone who had been bought over by the British would not have kept surveillance on him, so intense surveillance as you mentioned. And every time his release was brought up for, a review, they said his character is dubious, his antecedents are very suspicious, and so we cannot release him. So from 5 years, the restrictions actually moved on to become 13 long years. So somebody who's on your side, you would not keep them under house captivity. He was an useful man for the British government. He was a lawyer. They could have actually co-opted him into the government.
In fact, he doesn't even get to have his earnings from law, the barrister.
He didn't even have a degree because all his degrees were snatched away from him. He was a law graduate from London. Those degrees were taken away. His bachelor's degree from Ferguson College was snatched away. So on paper, he was just a metric pass. And he had no source of earning a livelihood. And he was editing a newspaper called Shraddhanand and then making a living, writing pseudonyms, articles in pseudonyms. And in all of that, he kept, praising the revolutionaries, whether it was Ashfaqullah Khan, which again is a calumny that he actually did not praise Ashfaqullah Khan, but all the other members of the Kakori case. But he actually spoke about all of these people and kept these underground links, whether it was Chandrasekhar Azad, whom Savarkar's elder brother meets in Kashi just 2 days before he kills himself in Allahabad, for whom Savarkar and his brother were actually raising funds and finances for the revolutionary movement, which is what I discovered quite to my alarm.
And my favorite, which is Durga.
Durga Bhabhi, yes, the lady who, disguised as Bhagat Singh's wife and helped him escape. She comes to Bombay and she stays with the Savarkars. And Savarkar
learns to tie the Maharashtrian
sari and wear a nath also and disguise herself as a Maharashtrian lady. And they do the Bombay Lamington shooting case, for which Savarkar also is actually sent to jail briefly. So there are numerous such underground links that continued, and Bhagat Singh, in fact, writes so extensively in praise of Savarkar, including in his, the Matwala, the newspaper that he was editing. And Savarkar's book on 1857 was almost like an entry criteria for people who were in the HSRA of Bhagat Singh, that have you read this book? Only then you are enrolled into the revolutionary movement. So such was the influence this man had. And this link continued thereafter too. I mean, Sachindranath Sanyal, another colleague of his in the cellular jail, and Savarkar were always in touch with each other. And through Sachindranath Sanyal, there is a linkage which is established with Rash Bihari Bose, who founded the INA, and eventually with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who was the culmination of this entire, revolutionary movement, which was all based on the same principle that you need to infiltrate the Indian army, ensure that there is defection to the side of the freedom struggle, and that's the only way the British Empire is going to fall on its knees.
Rash Bihari Bose, when Vikram mentions his name, again, I could not help thinking that in the era of non-internet, I mean, dur ki baat hai, but we are literally talking about a century back and more. Savarkar's speech, how it makes its way to Tokyo, where Rash Bihari Bose is there, because one of his men are in the audience here, so he writes his letter of praise. Just a little kind of taking the audience back to Durga Bhabhi, Bhabhi within quotes, because like we mentioned, she was in disguise. And imagine the role of women in the freedom struggle. We do tend to hear about Rani Lakshmi Bai. We also, it's not like we are not aware, but literally the minutiae to which women were involved, I think that this book captures really well. One quick read was that Durga Bhabhi and Prithvi Singh Azad, along with other revolutionaries, then drove on the midnight, heavily armed, towards the residence of Sir Malcolm Haley, who had been the governor of Punjab from 1924 to 28, and then the governor of the United Provinces. He was on a visit to Bombay, and the revolutionaries had planned to assassinate him. Finding the house heavily armed by the Punjab police personnel, they are trying to get their act together. On failing to locate him, Durga Bhabhi shot at Europeans who were coming out of the police station, and in this, Sergeant Taylor and his wife were injured. This incident was entered into the annals of anti-imperialism in India as the first instance in which a woman figured prominently in a terrorist outrage. I think it kind of clearly lays down equal gender participation for this. But Vikram, I want to sort of leap forward because I know we have much to cover. There's Quit India movement, or the movement that is not what it seems like. There is, of course, Mahatma Gandhi's assassination and things like that. But one thing which I particularly feel Ivattina Rajakarani, Aajkal ke Neta, could really take a leaf out of is when he's released from Ratnagiri. The British government's interning or internment, whatever technically the word is, ends, and he is now allowed to move out of Ratnagiri. That also, there's a lot of drama till the last minute. But the moment he comes to Bombay, the sort of reception, I mean, there are newspapers, and for me it was really a flashback of my own, television days when you're reaching out for sound bites, you see. So this is like us zamane ka sound bite where journalists were probably reaching out to Jawaharlal Nehru and everybody, M.N. Roy, and everyone is welcoming this man who has suffered enough, as they can see, 24 years. And the compliments or what they say, which you capture in this page, is quite coming from a place of genuine, it's not, you can say that this was a genuine acknowledgement of what their ideologically different man had done, because all of them had a common goal. So, for instance, you say that political opponents are not personal enemies. And then you, of course, wind to now, when you cannot have one Neta say anything remotely good about the other just because she or he is in an opponent political party. So I think this sort of environment or ecosystem, as today's fashionable word, of people who were there and so sort of multi-layered. So your research, how did you identify, I mean, did you really go looking for what had people and then you had to collate this, or was it sort of readily available that when he was in Bombay? Because, your research is something which I think a lot of people would be benefited by if you say more about that. Trade secrets.
Those are trade secrets I won't reveal, but then, the newspapers, of course, had all these, very extensive coverage of his reception, and the Congress was very keen on having him as one of their members. And he's famously supposed to have said that, I will not join the Congress because I'd rather be in the last row of the, the patriots than in the first row of the traitors. And he considered the Congress to be treacherous because, according to him, they had gone very far away in the policy of Muslim appeasement, which he thought was detrimental to the subcontinent. Maybe proved right in years to come. And yeah, what you said is very true. I mean, M.N. Roy, who was a leftist, Mr. Dange, as Mohandas Pai ji also mentioned, who was also a communist, all of these people had such good things to say to Savarkar, and also Subhash Chandra Bose, who was the president of the Congress at that time. There were lots of overtures being made to him to join the Congress. But then his dogged resistance to all of that ensured that he actually fell on the wrong side of the Congress, and thereafter, wherever he went, there were always attempts to show black flags, throw things at him, and also make murderous attempts at him by congressmen in different cities. The same party which was actually propagating non-violent
and I think Savarkar doesn't spare that at all.
Yeah, he actually writes about it extensively, and says, the chelas of the non-violent movement are actually making murderous attempts at me. There were numerous cases where he had to be whisked away. By a whisker of a margin, he saves his life. So that was how he entered. And instead of joining the Congress, he became the president of this All India Hindu Mahasabha, which till then was a decrepit party. It was almost like a chaperone of the Congress. There was dual membership between the Congress and the Mahasabha, and he makes it a electorally fighting fit party to give a challenge to both the Muslim League and the Congress, which were the lead political parties of the time.
Now, one thing needs to be, this ghost of the Muslim appeasement, I think, is a very sensitive topic, and not only that, it's almost the, what's the right word? It's the cornerstone of understanding why Savarkar was the way he was. So I want you to answer this question. A lot of people who cannot stand Savarkar, whether they have read about him or known about him, and very well, I mean, I also have a lot of friends, and until you actually read and probably try to get all this material on him, the charge against Savarkar is that he was so communal. Now, if you probably read that earlier book where, you know, it's a whole extensive thing of, you have set the background. Also in the cellular jail, he could see that there were attempts to convert prisoners into Islam and things like that. But Vikram, so what is the, you know, and then there is also in the later pages a British officer who says that he really found him to be communal. Now, is it something that Savarkar turns to be? Because we know that the Hindutva that he actually conceived of was not exactly Hindu. I mean, he has explained that in detail. It is much misunderstood. But for anybody who wishes to kind of go back to that and read, he's not exactly technically talking about that, but he's almost more like those who are aligned to the cause of the motherland, particularly with reference to the Khilafat movement, because he said that there is a lot of pan-Islamic ambitions that the Indian Muslims should refrain from. So there are all these controversial topics. But then how do you explain whether, in your view, is Savarkar communal?
It depends on how we define that word communal. So the problem in India, as I think Arun Shauri in his book had written, that in India the best way to call someone a secular person giving certificate is by dubbing everyone else as communal. And so anybody who spoke for the cause of the Hindu community, which was actually, according to him, being led to its destruction, like the Pied Piper leading the mice, particularly after the Khilafat movement, and the kind of communal violence that was seen in different parts of India, whether it was the Mopla carnage in Malabar, the riots all over India, whether it was Panipat and Kohat and Gulbarga, the mass conversions, and all of that, and the secessionist tendencies that were beginning to show up. The need for a separate state, the call for a separate, this whole Algawad, separatism that was rearing its head, right from the Morlemento reforms, the Lucknow Pact, and of course the separate electorates, communal award, all of that. In that context, anybody who spoke actually for an organization of the Hindu community was actually dubbed as communal. But what is important to understand is what were his policy statements as the leader of the Hindu Mahasabha towards this vexed issue of how did he see the minorities of this country. And that is very, very clear, because in his compilation of his speeches known as the Hindu Rashtra Darshan, he mentions very clearly that my conception of a free Hindu Rashtra is one where everybody is equal in the eyes of the law. The majority, the Hindus, will not get any extra concessions only because they are more in number, and the minorities will not get any extra privileges only because they are less in number. Your religion is something that is your private affair. Keep it in your house. Don't bring it to the public discourse. What is secularism? That is what is secularism. Separation of the government and from religion, whereas Gandhi was actually using religious symbolisms in politics, right? Whether it was Khilafat or also this whole allusion to, Ram Rajya and all of that, using religion in some way, whereas this man, who is called as communal, was actually saying everybody is equal, nobody gets extra concessions. The minority institutions can get support from the government, madrasas or churches or whatever, but the amount of money that goes to these institutions should be in direct proportion to the taxes that they pay to the national exchequer. I think a chartered accountant, learned person like Mr. Pai would approve that if you are a liability to the country, then you will not gain any privileges, but only if you are an asset to the country, then you will get what you give into the national pool. And as was mentioned, this document that I unearthed, which was very illuminative for me too, the constitution of free Hindustan state that Savarkar and the Hindu Mahasabha came up in 1945, 5 years before the actual Constitution of India, came up. And the final constitution and this draft constitution, it's about 100 pages long. It is there's so many similarities between that and the final constitution, and there too he mentions, the Mahasabha mentions, that there will be no state religion in free Hindustan or any of its provinces. No religion is going to be imposed on people. And in fact, in his speech, he also says the minorities need not even have a ghost of suspicion in their minds that any legitimate religious, cultural, and linguistic rights will be infringed upon by the Hindu Rashtra. And if there is at all an attempt to do that, the state will endeavor to remove those infringements. So, that being the case, even in a policy document or his own presidential speeches, to still go on with that is a little, I think, bad.
I think that,
but I think one point is, it would be totally wrong to completely exonerate also and say, there was suspicion.
I think during the Bengal famine, when he accused that because of the
there were proselytization attempts.
Proselytization also favoring those who were suffering.
But in a way, I also quote extensively Dr. Ambedkar, and that's something that is again, hidden from us. Ambedkar's writings on Islam or on Muslims, I think when you compare that to Savarkar pales in comparison. He's saying that Islam is a closed corporation and its benefits are only for a few people. And he also says that these are two different civilizations and they should not live together. This was Dr. Ambedkar speaking and saying that, the two countries should separate. There's no way that the minor nation can live within a major nation. But today, ironically, Ambedkar's photos are on anti-CAA protests, whereas he'll be the first person to have actually supported a law like that, which talks about religious minorities in those countries surrounding us. But then both of them said, we believe that there are two nations, as long as there is this larger allegiance to the Ummah, the universal brotherhood, which is faith-based, and the allegiance to the country comes perhaps after that. Yeah. And Savarkar repeatedly says that, till the time you keep stressing on your Muslim identity, I will keep stressing on my Hindu identity. The day you drop that, we are a Vishwamana, we believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, so I will come 10 steps ahead and embrace you. So I think
he in fact goes to some lengths, I would think, to actually distinguish between himself and Jinnah when media persons ask him, saying that you and Jinnah are, two sides of the same coin. He says that, well, he's asking for concessions and I'm in fact saying the other way around. Which is the perfect segue, Vikram, to get into this topic on the two-nation theory. I know it's a huge landmine. The book, of course, devotes considerable number of pages to this whole thing of how it came to be, all the negotiations. So in a let's say, your time starts now. In 2 minutes, if you can give your take on both the Quit India movement. Let's start, with that, because was it even a movement that we think it was? Today, parliamentarians, including the Prime Minister, they speak in very glowing terms about that. It's commemorated. But your book, your research, the material which is quoted here almost seems like it was a fizzle out.
Yeah. Yes, that was true because it was a very important movement to galvanize the masses. But then the movement itself, and today, just as we say, very wrongly, those who do not believe in a particular party or an ideology go away to Pakistan and all of that, that's what is said, right? The converse is also equally bad, where there's only one stream of freedom struggle, and anybody who did not participate in that are traitors. Like Mallikarjun Kharge in Parliament had, infamously commented to, I think, the Prime Minister that even your dogs did not participate in the freedom movement. So we are the natural claimants to the throne of India because we were the ones who fought the freedom, and anyone else is an outsider who comes and usurps this throne. Now, the Quit India movement particularly, it came in the aftermath of the failure of the Cripps mission, and Gandhi wanted to reassert his authority over the Congress party. And I've quoted extensively the dissent within the Congress itself for the Quit India movement. Maulana Azad, who was the president of the Congress, castigates Gandhi, saying this is the most illogical decision you're taking to do civil disobedience at a time when Japan was threatening to invade the country during the heights of the Second World War. Nehru had differences with Gandhi on Quit India movement. The movement had zero planning. And within 2 days of it being launched, almost all the Congress leaders, including Gandhi, were holed up and put in jail. So it was a leaderless movement. It had no plan of action or agenda. This do or die, that call that was given, it meant different things to different people. Some took it in a violent way, and it became a very bloody, violent movement, and that actually shook the British. Not the non-violent part of it, the violent part of the Quit India movement, where underground revolutionaries, army, revolts, all of that started catching up.
The mutinies.
And they started getting nightmares of 1857 repeating itself. But the movement itself, ironically, the Congress of the time disowned themselves from the Quit India movement because it was violent. Nehru, ruminates that to 2 decades, we've been dinning non-violence into people's heads, but nothing has borne fruit. We are not, associated with this. And after coming out of the Aga Khan Palace, where he was kept for 2 years, Gandhi himself actually apologizes for the movement and says, I will not do anything anymore to, embarrass the British government when it's going through this very difficult path. Ambedkar called the Quit India movement a treachery to the nation, and he actually asked everybody to abstain. It's the true patriotic duty of every Indian to abstain from participation in this movement, which is treacherous to the nation. So many, parallel contexts, and then we say, oh, but you did not participate in the Quit India movement, and that's why you have no role to play in the freedom movement. I don't think, because the movement was crushed in a matter of 3 months completely, and this was 1942. If it was so successful, why did it take the British 5 years to leave this country? Obviously, there were some other catalysts that actually shook them, which was the INA, the role of Subhash Chandra Bose, the naval mutiny, which was the final nail in the coffin. 18th February 1946, the mutinies began in Bombay, the Royal Indian Navy, the Indian Army forces in Jabalpur, Madras, different parts. And within 3 weeks, the British sent their cabinet mission plan to leave this country. Mountbatten was clearly told, from that wreckage, just try to excavate as much as possible and come back. And even that, the British had actually given 2 years. We were supposed to get our freedom in 1948, July or August 1948. 1 year in advance, they were in such a hurry to leave us and go away. Someone who had captured us for 200 years. So if 1942's effect, if it was so late on the British Empire, I'm sorry, it was a very sad empire which did not have a right to not have the sun set on it. So there were many, many different causes for freedom. And I think in the 75th year of independence, it's only right that we ruminate on the actual causes that led to freedom. And we're also having this discussion, Vasanti, on a very, very sad day. It was the direct action day. You spoke about two-nation theory. The Calcutta killings that happened on this very day, where almost there was a mass slaughter of the Hindus of Calcutta by Suhrawardi, the last premier of undivided Bengal. And what that did, it actually accentuated the partition of the country. Until then, actually, the interim government that the British were trying to put in place, Jinnah was still okay to a 50-50 deal with the Congress. 50% cabinet positions the Congress has and 50% the Muslim League has. But Nehru was not content with that. In the cabinet mission plan, they all agree to a particular pact. After coming out of the meeting and after having agreed everything in the meeting, Nehru conducts this press conference in Bombay saying, I don't agree to any of the things that were agreed there in the closed door meetings. And Jinnah is alarmed, saying, this is a gentleman's promise. You are going back from that. And that is what drives him to do the direct action. Says, we will take our Pakistan now at any cost. So the whole tragic series of events that happened, which I've tried to bring forth, pins the blame on how the partition of this country actually happened. What was this two-nation theory? Did it actually originate from Savarkar, or was it way back to Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and Allama Iqbal and so many others who always envisioned this separate nation because of this civilizational difference which they believed in?
Now, delving a little bit more on the two-nation theory and, of course, the description of the partition, most of which, of course, we have read to some extent, but the political back-end discussions, some of which failed in what you just now captured. But was it also the time slowly when Savarkar himself was going a little bit into political irrelevance?
Yeah.
So he clearly did not wield the kind of influence, power that he may have had in his younger days. And probably the outcome may have been different if it was the earlier Savarkar, do you feel?
True. I think his health had taken a big beating by then, and by 45 he had 2 heart attacks. He was almost dead. There was a lot of dissension within the Hindu Mahasabha, which was again one of his failings. He was a great ideologue, but may not be a mass leader like Gandhi was, where he could not even keep his own flock together. There were these dissensions between him and Shama Prasad Mukherjee, the Maharashtra faction versus the Bengal faction, and all the North Indian satraps, Raja Maheshwar Dayal Seth, Jugal Kishore Birla, all of them siding more with Mukherjee than with Savarkar. And in this, somewhere it fizzled out. But they also attempted something very interesting, which I found, which was, to split the Muslim political opinion. We think the Muslim League was the only Muslim political party of the time, but that was not true. There were so many others. The Krishak Praja Party of Fazlul Haq in Bengal, the Unionist Party, the Ittihad Party in Sindh by Sikandar Hayat Khan. So often it's said, the Hindu Mahasabha made alliances with the Muslim League, but it was not the Muslim League, it was these parties who were actually pro, a nationalistic, fervor. They were against partition. So his idea was to split the Muslim opinion and take into a coalition, a political coalition like what we have now, where you split a party and form a government and all of that.
Except that the plan doesn't really succeed. I think
it didn't succeed.
Yeah.
But Fazlul Haq and Shama Prasad Mukherjee joined hands and formed the government in Bengal, which to a large extent kept the Hindus of Bengal safe. It was only after that government fell and it became a Muslim League government in Bengal under Suhrawardi was when the Direct Action Day happened. So to a large extent they tried this to ensure that you're also projecting to the British that not all Muslims of India wanted a separate state. Ironically, those provinces which formed Pakistan, eventually, the Northwest Frontier Province, Sindh, Punjab, the Muslim League actually had very little political currency there. And those people did not want a separate state. The idea of Pakistan was sown in the heartland of India, in United Provinces, which is today, Uttar Pradesh. And Venkat Dhulipala has written this fascinating book called Creating a New Medina, where he goes into the details as to where this two-nation theory in the various, ulema discussions within United Provinces and not those districts which actually form Pakistan eventually, that the birth of this idea of a separate state, a two-nation, actually came about.
Even as you're saying this, I'm very tempted to tell our audiences a little bit about Rajagopalachari. Chakravarti Rajagopalachari, known as Rajaji. A lot of South Indians would have read other works of his. I too have. And for me, it was an eye-opener. You see, there is a time when he is released from Ratnagiri, and Rajaji also confesses that 20 years prior he had attempted, or he actually wrote a biography of Savarkar. Now, I don't know anybody in the audience if they knew. I was really...
This book is the one that is used to beat Savarkar up, saying that Life of Barrister Savarkar under a pseudonym Chitragupta, where it is assumed that Chitragupta was Savarkar himself and he was writing his own autobiography to praise himself as a prince among revolutionaries. The allusion is that that book was perhaps written by Rajaji because it was published from Madras by B.G. Paul Publications in 1926 when this man was actually in Ratnagiri in Maharashtra. So there's one allusion that it was written by V.V.S. Iyer, one allusion that it was written by Rajaji.
Yeah.
But the same Rajaji is someone that Savarkar castigates so much.
Exactly, I was coming to
as
that.
A
in
mad
fact,
mullah or something. He calls him all kinds of names.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because, like I was mentioning before, we tend to see even the Indian National Congress as sort of a homogeneous entity which played its part in the freedom struggle. But very quickly, I just want to read these 2-3 lines, which is that on his part, and we're talking about 1942 now, and it says, Rajagopalachari came up with a preposterous solution to the political deadlock. He suggested to the Viceroy that the latter form a provisional government and nominate 5 Congress leaders. Jinnah could be asked to choose as many League ministers as he wishes to make sure that the Pakistan issue is not prejudiced.
Yeah. So in fact, Rajaji got the first resolution on Pakistan passed even before Jinnah asked for it. The Madras legislature actually got the resolution on Pakistan passed, and this was totally rejected by the AICC in Allahabad. But later the CWC overrode the AICC and said, no, we actually, approve of this. So that's one reason why Savarkar and Rajaji had this running feud that, even Jinnah was not looking for a complete separate state. He was looking at autonomous units which are somewhat loosely, associated with a federation. But here the Congress was going overboard to say, even if you don't want, I'll give you Pakistan, just take it and leave. Because they were just so fed up of Jinnah that it was a lot of personal animosity as well as personal ambitions which came in the role, which accentuated the journey to partition.
I think any student of history might be tempted to probe a little further in terms of, did Rajaji's move, in a sense, hasten it? I mean, it's just a thought, of course. But moving on, the post-freedom. I mean, we come to the assassination, a very, very, very poignant, very unfortunate chapter here where the details of, and Nathuram Godse coming in and the Assassination Act and what followed. And given that the book is on Savarkar, I'm straight away coming to the part of, how Savarkar gets implicated in this and then the trial. The Red Fort trial, if you will. So we have only about, I think we should really start closing because I should make space for the audience Q&A. But would you like to sum up this whole episode, Vikram? I know it's not an easy thing, and people should be left to read the book to this thing for themselves. But for a kind of trial that he stood and what kind of a scene might have actually played out. There is Godse in the dock, and there is Savarkar who is refusing to look at him, and one can only imagine what must have been going on in the man's mind. Somebody who has already served the kind of this thing and led the really, really hard life, and towards the end of his life, he is faced with probably the biggest, gravest crime ever.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's going to be a little difficult because I had to peruse 11,100 pages from the National Archives of India of the Gandhi murder trial. So for me to now summarize that is a tough task nonetheless. But
it's okay, you have 2 minutes for
2 minutes again. So, very interestingly, what I came across was this motley group of people. They were not professional criminals or killers or whatever, Godse and Apte and Karkare and all of them. They were just these very, very disgruntled young men who were seeing the Naukhali killings. They had seen what had happened in Bengal. They had seen what the condition of the refugees was. And they just wanted retribution. And they were coming up with these fantastic and very, very outlandish kind of, plans that let's go and bomb Pakistan Assembly. When all of them are in session, let's kill all of them, including Jinnah. Not going into finer details as to how on earth are you going to ferry all the bombs and everything all the way to Pakistan. The next plan was let's loot the Nizam's treasury because the Nizam was not willing to join the Indian Union. So let's loot the treasury when it is going across from Maharashtra to Hyderabad state. But the victim came in front of them and presented himself, so to say, Gandhi, as late as 12th of January 1948. Before that, there was no plan to kill him. On 12th of January, when the news came out in public that Gandhi was going on a fast unto death, forcing the government of India to give 50 crores to Pakistan, at a time when Pakistan was actually sending its marauders and troops to Kashmir, and Kashmir was under so much fire, Gandhi said, unless you give them this money, which they would have used against us, which they did, I would go on a fast unto death. And the anger was spilling on the streets of Delhi, where refugees, Hindu and Sikh refugees, were shouting slogans that marna hai to marne do usko, because what is this? I mean, this is not how the father of our nation needs to behave. And that's when these guys plan that, okay, if we really have to do a retribution for the country, we have to bump this person off. And in a span of just 7 days, they actually do this amateur, unprofessional task of killing him. The first attempt on Gandhi was made on 20th of January, 1948. It was a failed attempt. That's a comedy of errors as to how it failed. The man who threw the bomb, when this refugee called Madanlal Pahwa was actually arrested by the government of India. And the government had 10 long days to actually connect all the dots. And Godse and Apte were so, so foolish that, in the hotel that they were staying in Delhi, they had given their, their shirt, their everything for laundry, which had his initials NVG written on it, Nathuram Vinayak Godse. And Madan Lal had given a testament in court that there was an editor of a Hindu newspaper in Pune who's behind this. All of this was there. Madan Lal was actually, they didn't even think that you're going to actually go and bomb Gandhi. On the sideline, Madan Lal was also acceding to his family request to go and rishta dekhne ke liye, ladki dekhne ke liye. He was also going and seeing a girl in Delhi. So zero strategy, zero planning. So it's actually an affront to Savarkar and his strategic thinking to say he was a part of this mastermind. He would not have been, even if he was, playing devil's advocate. It was such a rookie kind of attempt. But in those 10 crucial days, between 20th and 30th of January, Gandhiji's life could actually have been saved. Because all the clues were very much present with the Delhi police, with the Bombay police, with the government of India and the government of Bombay. But none of it was done. And that was what the Kapoor Commission or the Red Fort trial, they constantly castigated the government and the police that enough was not done to Godse and Apte were moving around the country with impunity. So unless there was tacit connivance from some higher up, this was not possible. So that becomes a very interesting, and in that whole thing, Savarkar becomes a fall guy. And I think the biggest admission to this comes from the Law Minister of India then, Dr. Ambedkar, who calls up, and I quote that source, he calls up Bhopatkar, who is Savarkar's lawyer in the case, and says, I want to meet you. And then he, at a designated place in Delhi, and Ambedkar himself is driving the car, and he asks Bhopatkar to hop in, and he says there is absolutely no case against your client. He has been fixed by the topmost authority in the government, and the cabinet is completely divided about this issue, and even Sardar Patel could not do much to override this. And then Bhopatkar in horror says, Jawaharlal Nehru, why would he do this? That's the source that I quote from Bhopatkar's memoirs. So obviously the case was so weak that it was to collapse like a pack of cards. And time and again, this exoneration was actually done. As late as 2018, a public interest litigation was filed in the Bombay High Court and the Supreme Court, where an amicus curiae was set up, and a constitutional bench headed by Justice Bobde and Justice Nageshwar Rao actually gave a complete hearing, and they said there's absolutely no case against Savarkar and his hand in the assassination, and the earlier trial court's verdict stays. So after that also, I mean, unfortunately it is
But the cloud of suspicion never really left Savarkar, and I think that's one of the biggest
And that's what
tragedies.
Sardar Patel writes to Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, saying your leader may be legally exonerated, but morally the question will always haunt him. And that's what sadly has happened. If the highest court also exonerates you, but still you are morally castigated, I think we need to have some belief in our rule of law.
One of the quotes which I would like to, before we open to the audience for questions is, during the trial, and it says that a few years after the trial, Advocate Inamdar visited Bombay, and he thought...
Whose son, incidentally, is here, Mr. Samir Inamdar.
Yes, Samir. It was good to meet you, and of course, after having read about, your father's role, which is in detail in this chapter for others to read, visited Bombay, and he thought it his duty to pay his respects to Savarkar at his residence. This was May 1951. Yamuna Bai, Savarkar's wife, received him, and he expressed his desire to meet the great man. She went upstairs and returned after about 10 minutes to tell him that Savarkar was really very unwell and would be unable to see him. The entire episode of the Gandhi murder case had made Savarkar more of a social recluse who shunned public contact, especially with those associated with either the plot or the trial. Inamdar, who the book mentions, he was a great fan of Savarkar. In admiration of his work, he felt deflated a second time after the rude rebuff he had got on his request for an autograph from Savarkar. I returned from the Savarkar Sadan, Sri Inamdar says, pondering over the susceptibility of even great men to human infirmities. On that note, as we open now to possible questions here, I think a whole gamut of the idealism of Savarkar, of him being so strong in conviction, Vikram, that almost every episode he explains himself. I mean, in the sense, it's not some of those impulsive, unsubstantiated stands, but he says why he stands in a way like that. But finally, to kind of go into this zone where even for when India got her freedom, he's not invited to the flag hoisting.
Yeah.
I mean, that for me was...
A few kilometers away in
Yeah,
Dadar.
I mean, that's a tragedy of a different kind. I mean, you can disagree with the man, his ideology, though, of course, his own contemporaries were in great praise of his heroism and his strategy, etc. But I think that was the ultimate blow.
Yeah.
And really, life can be so cruel.
And that's what I think made him that recluse, that anybody who came to his house was even being surveillance was put upon even by the Nehru government. And the Preventive Detention Act was put on him during the Nehru Liaquat Pact. And thousands of Hindu Mahasabha leaders, any political opposition was all holed up in jail. And the pact that they had to sign was till the first general elections in 1951, you cannot make political speeches. So you eliminate your political opponents and then you win a general election and then say it's the victory of popular mandate. So that was the way the first general elections of India were fought, and that was one reason after that I think he largely disassociated himself from public life. But he kept giving a lot of valuable warnings to the government on its China policy. He asked India to be very careful while dealing with China, the Hindi Chini, Bhai Bhai.
And it all so prophetic.
It's so prophetic, and the Panchsheel. And also, Mr. Zadka is here. He was a great proponent of Israel when the rest of India took a very ambivalent stand on Israel. Savarkar was the only man who actually went against the government of the time and said India should stand up for the cause of the Israelis and the creation of the state of Israel in 1948. And then also warned about the demographic change in the northeast of the country and how that would cause a lot of problem for national security, all of which kept coming true, but nobody was listening to him. And anybody who was associated with him, even with by a long measure, would pay a price, as I've often quoted, even for tuning his poems in Marathi. Someone of the eminence of Sri Hridaynath Mangeshkar loses his job in the All India Radio because he tuned Sagara Pran Talmalala, that famous poem, and Lataji and Ashaji and others, they actually sang it. For that, Hridaynath Mangeshkar actually loses his job. That was the intolerance in India in the Nehruvian era. And so who on earth would actually want to associate with someone like this, associating with whom would risk your political career, your livelihood?
Yeah.
And so today at least we are having this mainstream discussion in a room like this, and a mainstream publisher is actually publishing a book like this, which is a huge departure from what would have happened even 20, 30 years ago, where talking about Savarkar, ironically, a man who was against social untouchability all his life becomes a political untouchable, not willing for anyone to go anywhere close to him. That's why the last biography of his was written in the 1960s by Dhananjay Keer. And after that, no historian has thought it appropriate to reevaluate his legacy. As a senior fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, there's an entire tranche of Savarkar private papers, about 26 microfilms, each microfilm some 2,000 slides and pages, so you can think of the amount of material that's there. Every little letter that came in and went out of his house, put under surveillance both by the British and Nehru's government, are all sitting in Delhi in those vaults. When I saw the accession register, no historian had actually, referred to these.
It was all yours.
It was all mine, but then I wish there was someone else before me, in the 60 years where we have written so many biographies of so many people, and rightly so. Every year we have a biography of Gandhi or Nehru, and that I have no problem with that, because historical characters do need re-evaluation constantly. But someone whose political currency is so important today, given the political ascendancy of Hindutva, why is it that this man was not even taken up for an honest evaluation? It's either demonization
and
or
of course the
extreme
differences between the RSS
eulogy.
itself and his differences, let's say in the chapter of Golwalkar. I'm not
It's a
going
chapter in itself, so
yes,
let's
so
not
I'm
get
not
there.
going there. But please, we could have questions now.
Mr. Inamdar.
Mr. Inamdar is Samir's. Pitra Bhumi.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think so, and I've thought that several times. But then he also mentions that in his Hindutva book itself, where he says, Shakespeare might have said, what is in a name? But then a name is very important when it comes to Hindu, because it's not just a religion, it's a cultural identity. Because people outside this landmass saw us as Hindus, irrespective of whatever faith we belong to. It was not the Hinduism, the religion that we practice, but culturally and nationally we were seen as, and the Arab, corruption of the name, Sindhu to Hindu, but even the word Hindu and, in our scriptures and so on, all of which makes it important that the people who belong to this landmass were Hindu. The Al-Hind and so on, that the Persian records talk of us. Or even, Savarkar had a Parsi lawyer called Baptista when he was fighting this case in the International Court of Justice at Hague. The French records actually call that lawyer as a Hindu lawyer. He may have been a Parsi, but for the rest of the world, the synonymity between Hindu and Indian was something very same. So that is why for him, the name was everything, but that gave itself to all these interpretations because it was synonymous with the religion as well. Yeah.
This Hindutva is not something that everybody opposed till the 90s.
Yeah.
I mean, Indira Gandhi was, expressing his admiration for
True.
Savarkar.
True.
They put it up in parliament.
True.
Why did all this negativism happen in the last 10 years?
Sir, I would attribute it to the fact that maybe at that time those parties or Hindutva did not have a political currency in India as much as it probably had with the coming of the first BJP government by Mr. Vajpayee, and then of course after 2014. So anybody who wants to...
Are you saying that we had a political party which consolidated the Hindu vote? It had to be opposed
Yeah.
by the ancient regime.
Yeah.
So they had to pick on something called Hindutva.
Yeah, yeah.
To fight the political battle and abuse the Hindus.
Yes, very much, very much.
Yes, there's a question this side. Yeah, you. Thank you.
Thank you, Abbas. You're not an amateur student of history, you're a budding historian yourself. Yeah, I don't know if they're honest about the Mughals or any, to a large extent, a lot of that is also kind of sanitized because,
Abbas, I think you're setting him off for his next book. Already he must be thinking, okay, next he'll write in the Mughals now.
No, he's already writing books on the Mughals, so I'm not taking away his work at all. No, but I think that answers stems from what Mr. Pai just asked and what he also mentioned, that he becomes a fall guy for the reason that one is, of course, he was a propounder of the philosophy, and it's a lot of contemporary politics playing up, where, you know, to attack the BJP today or to attack leaders of the BJP, the best attempt is thought that you attack its ideological forefather, who was Savarkar, whereas all the others who also, like I said, I mean, nobody would call Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as an Islamophobe today, which he would actually, by today's judgment, he would very much fit that bill based on what he wrote completely. But then he has political capital. Today, any objective assessment of him is difficult. Arun Shourie paid the price when he wrote that book, Worshipping False Gods, on Dr. Ambedkar, because you can't say anything objectively about him, because votes are cast in that name. There's an appropriation. So I think when contemporary politics enters historiography, that is the biggest casualty, and we can't have a very objective and impartial writing of history in that case.
I'm told we will have to close because people have to leave, but very quick question.
That's partisan because that's her uncle, right?
Yeah, but he was the first to also put up
yes, yes.
But I put him at the end. Yes. G.
He was very liberal in his view and non-communal. But then, how come Uta Chor Kotwal ko dane? When Gandhiji brought in the Malabar problem into forefront, and when people asked him, why that the Malabar so-called rebellion, was no rebellion actually, then how come the whole thing got shifted away from Gandhi? What was the machinery that the people had that Savarkar did not have?
Mass
To him up
movement,
such a big pedestal.
I think mass movement, as I mentioned, he did not have a mass following like Gandhi had. Gandhi was a very adept politician too, in addition to being a saintly figure. He was an adept politician who understood how to keep, how to also pass on his message correctly to the people, using the language they understood, and not in this brash and nihilistic kind of attitude that Savarkar adopted. He could not even convince, as I said, his own party members. So that was a failing as a leader. And of course, the narrative post-independence, where one stream of thought or one political movement was given all the importance, that also raised Gandhi to the pedestal that whatever he might have said, which is all in public domain. You refer to the Mopla carnage, where for the people who slaughtered the Nayars in Malabar in cold blood, men, women and children, Gandhi called them as brave patriots who were fighting for the cause of their religion. And so what can be more, and when Swami Shraddhanand of the Arya Samaj was killed by Abdul Rashid, a fanatic, he said, my dear brother Abdul Rashid, I do not even consider him as an assassin. You should get into the psyche of the assassin to understand. But sadly, two decades later, the followers of Gandhi did not consider Godse as my dear brother Godse. Leave alone Godse, the entire community of Chitpavan Brahmins and Maharashtrian Brahmins who were ruthlessly murdered, their properties burnt in different parts of Maharashtra, is again a story that has been wiped off from the books of history in our country. So that is, Savarkar's brother was stoned and he died of a brain hemorrhage and so on. So all these uncomfortable truths of our past have been very craftily sanitized from us, but the truth has a tendency to keep resurfacing, and these are just small attempts that some of us are doing to ensure that light is illuminated on the facts.
While we, of course, have the author to thank for desanitizing in the era of sanitization this important historical figure, I would like to end with just a quick passage on Savarkar's passing on. Which really for me is not just, it's a closure, of course, of the whole life story, but also the pragmatic man that he was, and so misunderstood, particularly the context of Hindutva as we see him today definitely needs to be revisited by even those who do not agree with him or do not understand him yet. Savarkar had clearly stated in his will that upon his death there should be no mourning and inconvenience caused to the people at large with hartals. He had also willed that he must be cremated in an electric crematorium and not on a pyre of wood, and with no religious rituals and ceremonies. At best, Vedic hymns could be chanted. He had to be carried to the crematorium in mechanized transport, not on human shoulders. I mean, he actually wrote this out. No Shraddha ceremonies were to be performed for him. And according to his will, his obsequies were not performed. His ashes were immersed in the sea at Dadar Chowpatty by his son Vishwas, and they were not given to anybody for public immersion or deification.
And the death also was not of natural causes. It was in the Jain tradition of Paryopaveshan, where he actually gave up his life voluntarily by not taking food and water and medicines, and finally died on 26th of February, 1966.
So in a way, it's certainly a life worth examining, and may I request the audience to give a big hand to Vikram for this stellar research and material that he has put together. Thank you, Vikram. We owe you one.
Eminent guests for gracing this today's occasion. I would also like to thank our hospitality partner Taj West End Bengaluru, our associate Penguin Random House India, and the media. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our patrons who made these sessions possible even during these difficult times. Stay well, stay safe, everybody. Good night. Please do pick up your copies, and Dr. Vikram would.
Can you just switch this on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I would have done an incomplete job if I do not mention Savarkar's wife, Yamuna Savarkar. Again, you know, really a lot of things left unsaid simply because we have to cover so much ground, but I really urge those of you who are reading, you will of course see, because those who are unsung and then the unheard also in this case. So I think salute to all that whole gamut of people in our freedom struggle. Namaskara, thank you.